Welcome to a Book a Day podcast, and I'm back with another book this time. It's called Shattered Lands. The book is written by Sam Dalrymple, who is the son of popular historian and author William Dalrymple. And even though I'm not sure that any author should be introduced that way, but I just thought I should pass on this information as many of you would be curious with that Dalrymple surname. So just making that clear, this is Sam Dalrymple's first book, and the subject of this book, the subtitle makes it clear. It's called Five Partitions and the Making of Modern Asia. And I don't know how apt that is. They are talking about modern Asia, but in this case, when we are talking about the five partitions are of the British India, and which at the time, almost a century ago, extended from the part that we call Middle East today, from Yemen to in the east towards Myanmar. So it's not entirely about Asia, it's mostly about the Indian subcontinent and more about the British India and how that got partitioned into these different countries. And out of these five partitions, eight or rather nine countries got into existence. And I find this idea really interesting because a lot of times we don't talk about it. When we talk about partition in the context of Indian subcontinent, most of us think straight away of India-Pakistan partition. But we have to remember the British India was a much bigger entity. The countries that we now call as, of course, India and Pakistan are there, and then Bangladesh is there. And then, of course, there used to be Burma, now it's called Myanmar. Then there was Nepal, Bhutan, uh, Yemen, Oman, UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait. All of these were bound together and they were under a single imperial banner, and officially it was called the Indian Empire. In fact, when you take a look at the British Indian passport of the time, this whole region was supposed to be one. Quite fun that way if you think about it. You didn't need a lot of travel permissions if you wanted to travel within these 8 9 countries at the time. But of course, times have changed and we have got now different countries. And yet, it's fascinating in almost a span of a century, in fact, less than 100 years, how the maps have changed. And nobody even really talks about it. We have kind of really accepted it. And in fact, how the history has panned out, it not just people who live in this age, they feel surprised the way it has turned out to be, but people who lived in the 20th century and the things were unfolding right in front of them, they would have been surprised to see it unfolded that way. For example, if we talk about the state of Hyderabad at the time, and its ruler, the Nizam, who was one of the richest men in the world at that time. In fact, in 1937, he was the richest man in the world. And in the matter of almost a decade, that state ceased to be. And yet, on the other hand, you had slightly smaller kingdoms, say that of Bhutan or Dubai, and they continue to be different countries. And earlier they were part of British India, now they are not. They are different countries. Hyderabad, which was at that time under British India, the Nizams were ruling there. Of course, there were a lot of treaties and agreements between these kingdoms and the British Empire that the British Empire provided the defense for them, the foreign policy them, and they were pretty much comfortable with ruling their own states. So that way, the empire kind of provided stability to the region. So while the British Empire was pushing its boundaries on the peripheries of the British India, within the mainland of India, you find that a lot of these kingdoms were living together peacefully, and all the rebellion that was there or the protests that were there, they were mostly against the British Empire. Otherwise, the kingdoms, they were observing a lot of peace and stability. Now, coming back to the main theme of the book, which is about the partitions. There are 5 partitions. What are they? The first one is when Burma, now Myanmar, that became a separate country. It happened in 1937. I think the date was probably 1st April. Then the second partition was the more interesting one, which was the partition of Arabian Peninsula. There were regions of this part that were part of the British India. Then they got separated. So most of the Arabian Peninsula, the countries that we now know as Yemen, Oman, UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, all of them, they got separated. The third one is the more popular one, that is the partition of India and Pakistan, which happened in 1947. In the fourth partition, there was the partition of the princely states, and following the division of the Indian mainland into India and Pakistan, a lot of these princely states were given the option to join either of these two newly formed countries, and almost all of them went one way or the other. Those who didn't join either of them, they were eventually forced to join these two countries. And then finally, in the fifth partition in 1971, Bangladesh got separated from Pakistan. So those are the stories of 5 partitions, which we will discuss over the course of next few episodes, starting with today, where we will discuss the first one, that is how Burma got separated from India in 1937. For that, we'll go back to 1928 first, when this famous, or rather infamous, Simon Commission was supposed to reach India. And the commission was supposed to carry out a lot of constitutional reforms, but the problem with that was there was no Indian member in it. And that's why there was a lot of opposition in India to it. And wherever the member of this commission went, they faced a lot of protests, sometimes violent, sometimes peaceful. And in fact, the journey of this commission was quite interesting. It started somewhere in the region in Yemen. Then they went to Mumbai in India, then traveled in the northern and northeastern parts of India, and from there they went to eastern boundaries of British India, that was Burma, and then they also went south to places like Mysore, Hyderabad, all those places. So they covered a lot of places of the British India. And in the book, you find quite interesting anecdotes about their experiences here. For example, when they arrive in Bombay, they experience this high-class culture where there are a lot of fancy places, rich clubs, where they experience a different world. They hadn't really expected it. And from there, when they travel to Delhi, from Bombay to Delhi, then they see the dusty side of India, the not so rich side of India, which they had seen in Mumbai, or Bombay rather. And of course, they were supposed to a lot of important leaders when they were in India. And at that time, 2 leaders were of great significance, and their journey has been described quite in detail in this chapter. The first one is or was Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who was also the founder of Pakistan. But it's interesting what role he played at the time, because earlier in those years, Jinnah was a part of Indian National Congress and he was considered an ambassador of Hindu Muslim unity. He came from the elite class, and at that time he wasn't really following the politics of masses. It was more about politics of elites and classes, and his idea of achieving independence was more through legal methods, constitutional methods. On the other hand, the other towering figure was Mahatma Gandhi, who was quite the opposite, who was the mass leader, who was doing the politics of masses. So these two figures, and over the years, the distances and differences between them kept growing. Jinnah had a very specific problem with Gandhi. It was that Gandhi had brought religion into politics. And Gandhi saw it differently. He thought that in order to talk to masses, in order to appeal to a common person, you had to appeal to his emotion, and religion did that. So Gandhi came from a different idea that you have to embrace everybody's religion, and he was fine with discussing religious ideas with different religious groups, and he had no problem in bringing religion into politics. Jinnah, on the other hand, was, at least at that time, very much against it, at not really bringing politics into not really bringing religion into politics. But there is something very interesting that I found in this book, and that made me wonder. And this is something that we do as writers when we are creating our protagonists and we are telling a story through somebody's eyes, or we're trying to portray somebody as a hero or as a villain. I wouldn't say that these people have been portrayed as heroes or villains, but I will say that the way Jinnah's journey has been described in this book, at least in this chapter, it tells you more about that the author kind of empathizes with Jinnah, and he tells you about the struggles of Jinnah and the kind of personal experiences he went through. He married this young girl who was this gorgeous young girl from a rich Parsi family, and the family was against it, and yet they went ahead, they got married. She got converted to Islam because of Jinnah, and then tough times came, the marriage fell apart eventually, and she committed suicide. And Jinnah went through all those different emotions, and we get to learn about them. I think the same favor hasn't been done to Gandhi in this case. That we are told about Gandhi, for example, we are told about his experience in South Africa, how he experienced racism there, and how he came back and started his journey, and all the protests that he did. But it's not the same personal struggle, all the vulnerable sides or the emotional sides of Gandhi that have been described as that of Jinnah, the way they have been described. So there's this moment where Jinnah, he has a tough time at the Congress meeting, and then he comes back and he just cries, and he hasn't really cried before, as one of the friends recount. So the friend recounts that I hadn't seen him crying before, but at that moment when he was parting ways with Congress, he just cried. And you see that vulnerable, that difficult side of Jinnah has been described, but not the case with Gandhi. Just my interpretation. You might feel it differently, you might see it differently, but just something that I felt after reading this chapter. And it could be because of the way author interprets these partitions. For example, this point author repeatedly makes that the way India has been partitioned, um, it's because a lot of Hindu nationalists at the time, they wanted the traditional India's image that they had in mind from the ancient India, and which didn't really include the Arab section or the Burma as we had it then. So that's why the partition somehow, it feels that author is somehow giving the responsibility, putting the responsibility on Gandhi or other Hindu leaders who imagined India in a more ancient Hindu way. But as we explore further these chapters, we find out that you cannot really place all the responsibility on Gandhi or these leaders. I'm not saying this because I am biased towards Gandhi or Indian nationalism. It's just I'm just trying to understand this perspective that uh, when the things unfold and we see the next events, the way partitions happen, it wasn't really because of Gandhi. It wasn't really because of those who imagined India in its ancient Hindu identity. It wasn't just because of them. And yet, the author, a couple of times at least, asserts this point that it's because of that identity assertion that partition took place. Now coming back to the partition that happened between India and Burma, or rather Burma came into existence. First of all, today when we think about Burma, we kind of imagine it as a separate country, and it's not this, doesn't feel it the same way as we think about Pakistan or Bangladesh, which feel much closer and culturally much closer, and even in terms of distance, they are very much right next to India. But when it comes to Burma, most of us forget that it was once upon a time really an important part of India, and the city of Rangoon, uh, a lot of people used to visit there. It also featured in one of the most popular Hindi songs, and it was in Rangoon that the Simon Commission also went eventually. And there in Burma, as you would expect in any other country or region's politics, there were two sections. There was one group that wanted to remain part of India, and there were separatists who wanted a separate country, didn't want to become a part of India, didn't want to remain rather a part of India, as it was then a part of British India. Now, there comes the point of leadership. Gandhi had this idea that the Burmese people, they should have the right to choose whatever they want for their destiny. And he believed that these people had different identity. And as has been mentioned before, the region of Burma didn't really feature in the imagination of ancient India or Bharat. So he felt that probably it will be a good idea that Burma remains separated from India, from the mainland India. But could you blame Gandhi for that? Uh, First of all, even if he felt that this region should not be part of India, that's an opinion, and he had every right to have that opinion. But at the same time, there were genuine conflicts in that area. And the author himself describes these events in the next few pages. So, for example, the 1929, in the year, what happened was the US stock market crashed, and as we all know, there was a global depression after that. What happened because of that was the global cost of rice that dropped, and because of that, Burmese farmers they suffered really badly. And there in Burma at that time, a lot of Tamilians, a lot of Indians, they were giving money to the local farmers. They were doing their businesses, and because the economy really struggled, these industrialists, these businessmen, these creditors, they started taking control of the collateral because the farmers couldn't repay their loans. And then the differences, the discrimination that grew up because that feeling came up in the Burmese people that these Indian people are after us and they will occupy us, they will take our jobs, take our lands. So that rhetoric clearly fueled the separatist voices. Then there were other events. For example, there was this massive earthquake. Because of that, um, uh, some buildings, some religious structures had collapsed, and then some crowds of Indian people started celebrating it. And once again, um, people fought with each other. Then there were rumors about how Indian laborers had mutilated a young Burmese girl, and because of that, once again, riots erupted, and those were horrible. They went on for days and weeks, and several hundred people died. And eventually, the Indian community that was there, Indian as in the India that is today, I'm speaking in those terms because otherwise that too was India back then. So the Indian community from Tamil Nadu, from different parts of India, they had to seek refuge in different parts of the city and save their lives. So the communal tension, the racial tension, that went on for a long time. And once things got to that stage, it was very difficult to build those bridges once again. But as it happens in almost all the history, things were not as straightforward as they seem. As I said, there were people who were supporting um, the separatist movement, but there were also people who wanted to remain with the Indian mainland. They thought their economy would do better, and overall it will be beneficial for them if it remained a part of India. In fact, if you look at the history as it turned out, it feels that probably they would have benefited if they had remained a part of India. The economic activity would have been much better. And in the subsequent decades, what happened to the Myanmar or Burma's economy, it just went from bad to worse. And then at the same time, when these two groups were there, you have to understand there were many ethnic and religious tribes were there. In fact, when you look at the border of India and Myanmar today, in the northeast of India, you'll find states like Assam, Tripura, Nagaland, and there are a lot of tribes there. And because at that time also, because the line that was being drawn at the time, a lot of these tribes they had to be partitioned. Some areas of those tribes were falling in India, some areas were falling in Burma, and that was going to be a problem. So these tribes also started participating in the violence. So what would the British do? The British continued with their meetings, and as I said, the important leadership such as Jinnah, Gandhi, they all discussed these matters. In fact, the leaders from Burma, they were also there. But as the decision was taken and it was decided that Burma would be separated from the Union of India, a lot of people who wanted to be a part of, in Burma that is, who wanted to be a part of India, they felt that the British Empire was not being fair. They were just taking decisions without consulting the leadership or the people of India or people of Burma, and it wasn't really fair. But eventually, it was all decided by the British, and obviously, even if the Indians had a say or the Burmese had a say, they had very little say in it. And that's how eventually the Burmese people, they got their own separate union eventually. Uh, when the British left, they got their own country. Later, they called it Myanmar. But the troubles didn't really end there. As I said, a lot of tribes were there, they got separated, and the borders, the way they were arbitrarily drawn, as it happened in the history of the British Empire, pretty much everywhere, they still create troubles. Still, in the India-Myanmar border, you'll find that a lot of incursions are taking place, a lot of tribes are still fighting. All of that is taking place. Another important consequence of that was that a lot of the population there in Burma was Buddhist population. So that meant the significant population of Buddhist people went into that country, which means whatever was left with, was India was left with, there were significant number of Hindus and Muslims. Of course, there were Jains and Sikhs and different other groups, but that amount of people, the Buddhist people, if they had been there in the modern India, it would have been a much more diverse, in terms of religious diversity. That is, it would have been like that, but that didn't happen, and that, according to author, gave rise to India's more Hindu identity. And from there, once the fear of Hindu identity came in, that the Hindus will dominate, the Muslims got worried about their place in this newly formed Hindu majority country. They demanded a separate state for Muslims, and that's how Pakistan came into existence. So that's the question that I'm talking about today. That who do you place the blame on when it comes to the partition? Do you place the blame on these tensions that were ongoing there between these important groups of people, including Hindus and Muslims also? So that was the reality. There were differences that were probably difficult to reconcile. Do you blame that? Or do you blame, let's say, in case of India or Pakistan's partition, do you blame the Muslims or the Muslim League, who demanded a separate state, who exaggerated their fears that they won't have their say in a democratic India? Do you blame them, or do you blame the Hindus, or Hindu leadership of the time rather, who thought that they were going to build the new India in the image of their ancient Hindu India, and because of that, they kind of isolated on one side in the east the Buddhist population, the Burmese people. At the same time, they isolated the Muslims of the region, and that's how the country of Pakistan and eventually Bangladesh came into existence. That's a very difficult question, and I don't think you can have it one way. You can blame just one side for it. But I just felt that the author's views, they point in one direction. I would like, if I had the option, to ask the author to elaborate more on this point, but maybe I'll do that later. For now, we'll continue discussing this book, and we'll talk about the next partition of India, and I'll catch you then. And I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and you'll continue to enjoy the next few episodes when we discover more interesting things about these different partitions of the British India. So thank you very much for listening. I'll catch you the next time. Thank you.